Hi, everybody. Hopefully, we're all learning a lot. We're getting some perspectives here on, what the problem space is, what the opportunity space is. In this presentation, which was titled Carrier APIs, Do They Offer More or Less Than Third Parties? I'm going to take us through kind of a bit of a roller coaster way up into the clouds, into the conceptual high spaces, and then back down to the somewhat muddy reality in which we live today with regard to APIs. I'm not going to draw any necessary conclusions or whatever, but really just lay out some facts and let you draw your own conclusions, and then we'll discuss the potential on the panel. But first, just to shift, from the question of APIs, let's kind of drop back into kind of a story space, and let's think about open platforms and the concept that these really are beautiful things. So I'm not an artist, but I tried to capture at a kind of a conceptual level a bit of a storyline about what open platforms can be and how they can develop. This, if you can recognize what it is supposed to look like islands. So in the beginning, there were some islands. They were quiet, somewhat isolated places. Getting from one to the other wasn't easy, and there was little that they shared or knew that they could share, in fact. But somebody thought of the idea of connecting the islands with roads and bridges. It was a good thing, and it made it possible for the islands to trade effectively, and in time, commerce grew and the population grew. But for some, it began to feel a little crowded and constrained. There being no more islands, they decided to move into a cloud. There also being no airplanes, someone figured out how to build roads to the clouds. Each island built connections to the cloud, and in return, the islanders found that there were useful and different things in the cloud. The cloud life became so popular that other cloud cities were built. The clouds grew in population and independence. Even the roads to the clouds became places to live, as people realized that they were useful places to build upon also. But pretty soon it began to get very crowded in the cloud. And the cloud cities began to expand to cover the space between the roads. It was like a new, glorious, over-the-top world. And the cloud people loved it. The islanders, though, began to worry that if the cloud cities grew too large, they would block out the sun. And so much of so much of the cool stuff really seemed to be happening in the clouds that the islanders looked around their now relatively old-feeling islands and began to want something more. Then some innovative islander figured out that the clouds could support other clouds, and that new roads could be built between clouds. The islanders rushed to build their own clouds, and in the end, all of the clouds were connected, with people, trade, and cool things flowing every which way. It also became clear over time that there were some things that you just couldn't get in the clouds. The islanders that were left then went into business, supplying those things to the clouds, building great factories that were connected to the clouds and added strength and resilience to the whole bizarre arrangement. They'd come a long way from the simple island life. But now everybody had a place, a job, and the knowledge that they could come up with even stranger things as long as they kept an open mind. So what can we learn from this bit of a diversion? First of all, islands can be lonely places, just like, walled cities, right? Clouds can be lonely places too. We actually need a much bigger open environment in which to live, one that's much more flexible. In these various places that we live, connections are the key to unlocking value. We all have something to offer, as suppliers and as users. We have both roles, and we need to find every opportunity to exercise those roles. For the people who build platforms, especially platforms that are open, they inherently are assuming that people are going to use those platforms and build upon them. That's what they're there for. Especially open platforms create opportunities for people to develop innovative solutions. And the rest is really up to us. So given the fact that we have open platforms, that we have a desire to reach out and connect things, we should have the ability to cooperate and collaborate across the ecosystem without limit. So now I'll step back into the basic subject of the presentation, and this is down at the line level, if you will. These are the things that people offer today, comparing, and this is a very quick comparison, very quick survey that I did over the past couple days, comparing what is publicly available, presented by various carriers on their developer program or whatever website in which they publicize these things, comparing the current offers to what, for example, some over-the-top players, I picked here Facebook and Google. You could pick any number of others in terms of APIs. This is, as I said, just a start on kind of an analysis. I think it would be very valuable for OMA to do. I won't say that every significant API is represented. I probably have missed things. I've probably mislabeled things in terms of the API focus. And it's certainly a very complex thing in which to determine overlap. But this is an illustration, and we could take it for what it is and take it to the next level, and I'll draw some conclusions at the end. There's several slides here which illustrate that across the world, and I started from the top with all of the mobile network operators as illustrated by Wikipedia, and found what they easily make available for you to find as a developer. And you can see that with messaging, for example, there actually is pretty broad support across the world in terms of the very basic standards for messaging, SMS, and the WAP forums, so far probably most successful communication enabler, MMS, multimedia messaging. As well, there's still support for WAP push, which is a way of invoking or delivering web references down to the browser to let people integrate services, etc. There is some expansion in the space of beyond messaging, the ability to create contacts and to determine presence of individuals. I'll also note that there, not on this deck, are a number of APIs that people are working on very hard, which are going to expand these capabilities, especially with RCS and other enablers that are coming. The equivalent, really, in the over-the-top space, I think, with regard to messaging, is Google's cloud messaging product, which is another way of doing push specific to their platform. I'll also note that in messaging, as in many other things, there is a big need for aggregators, for people who harmonize all these various APIs, even though in this case, most of these messaging APIs are standard. They're standard representations of how to do this. But if you take, for example, Apple Push, Google Cloud Messaging, and WAP Push, BlackBerry Push, etc., you find that there is a space in which people like aggregators which make it possible for apps to work over all of these, to come into a space and simplify the developer experience. In the case, moving on from messaging, with regard to the information about user and the relationships that they have, there's a lot more activity, because in the end, coming back to the goal of a user experience focus, things like information about the user that can help personalize the application, the ability of the user to use the innate single sign-on capabilities that exist in the mobile device or in a over-the-top relationship that they have, for example, with Google services or Facebook. These are things that people are beginning to get experience with every day. And there's a good bit of overlap in this space, certainly. And with regard to social networking, which is really the ultimate reason why many of the over-the-top services rose, there is a lot of overlap. In the network operator space, it's beginning to grow, especially with RCS and Join, et cetera. We could expect to see additional capabilities coming in the future in this space. And in this particular case, one more point, the purpose of these social network APIs is kind of fuzzy. You could say these are messaging APIs, but they're really communication in the context of social interaction. Looking then at a bit farther ranging, you could say that calling, for example, is another way of communication, and certainly there is a lot of activity in the WebRTC space. We can expect to see a number of capabilities. It was mentioned by Twilio, for example, that WebRTC is one of the ways that they can connect people. There's a lot of activity in that space with regard to APIs and then abstractions of those APIs as JavaScript libraries. For example, there's the ATT.js JavaScript library that AT&T offers, which abstracts the various underlying signaling implementations that exist today as prototypes of WebRTC to IMS integration. And then there's the Orca.js, which is a open source project of the Addis organization, which is kind of the root of what we're trying to do with ATT.js, sort of the upstream open source project that our library uses as its foundation. And there are parallels of that with, for example, Google Hangouts, which is probably going to be the way that Google enters this overall space in terms of creating an environment in which users could communicate. The cloud storage space is very, very busy. As well, operators are beginning to take their enablers and make them more resilient to changing devices, to backup, et cetera, and opening APIs to those things. Location, though, has been one of the core enablers. If I was to say the top three, it was messaging, location, and payment, honestly, in terms of the adoption by operators. Location being, one of the founding apps, really, of Google. There's been significant overlap for quite some time in that space as well. And in the more meta applications of location, such as mapping, there are examples, for example, the China Telecom API here, of operators opening up these kind of additional applications using these basic technologies. Payment, I mentioned, is one of the major areas in which operators have opened up APIs, especially going back to the early 2000s. Bill on Behalf Of was a concept that was embraced early by the network operator community. In the past few years, we've opened up APIs to make that possible. This is also a very important thing for the over-the-top players because along with relationships, there's the ability to gain economic value from the things that the users buys as part of their experience. Advertising as well, this was the number one reason, for example, for the rise of Google. Search and advertising based upon search. There are some APIs that are beginning to be rolled out by operators that enable ads to be targeted to users based upon user preferences, based upon opt-in to that service by the user. Facebook as well has integrated ads into their platform. Going beyond, you begin to see a space in which you have a bit more differentiation of purpose and APIs, device management, for example, information about the device, et cetera. Things such as very significant space, speech recognition, speech synthesis, Even face detection. China Telecom has an API for face detection. In the space of video, there's some overlap. Certainly mobile network operators have operated mobile video services for a long time, but making it possible to program those services is a relatively new capability. Then in the kind of the content and application space, you see some operators, for example, China Telecom has APIs specific to various particular types of content. And then looking further, this is the last slide. There's a whole lot of APIs, obviously. You see there's still a lot of diversity and people trying new APIs in the market. Search being, again, one of the key things in which we have some overlap. So what can we learn from this really quick, incomplete survey? First of all, APIs are packaged around use cases. The reason that the company exists tends to be based around what users get from that company, and that's where they develop their APIs in order to unlock those assets. So carriers, it's messaging, location, and communications, right? Social networks, it's about friends, about relationships, and about sharing. So there is some overlap. It's limited, but it is growing. I mean, we're invading each other's space pretty quickly. Advertising, payment, cloud, etc. I'll note that this is just a first step. Certainly there's a lot of unanswered questions. For example, it's really only the high-level scope of these APIs. It's very clear, though, that the APIs are deployed using somewhat conflicting, fragmented specifications. There's definitely a need for an abstraction layer, what's called a polyfill in the web terms. That's an inhibitor for developers. That's something that we really have to address. It only considers public APIs. There are other APIs available for partners, many more in fact, and there are many APIs in development that are not public yet. So this is a very active space. Really, the market only has about, I would say tops 3 years, the mobile market, 3 years in really exploring this space strongly. And it doesn't consider aggregators. For example, if you look at SMS and WAP push, they cover the globe today. There are many, many aggregators, and they offer, in fact, their own proprietary APIs. So if you want to find out more about these APIs, the links are on the slides, in the individual API slides, and here are the links to the developer programs. So in summary, it's really up to our imagination to build upon the tools that we have and to recognize that while there is a lot of capability out there, it's not necessarily consistent. It's not driven by a common sense of purpose. And these are very difficult things to overcome with regards to developer and user experience, but it's really up to our own initiative and imagination.